Welcome to the lecture video for Algebra 2, Chapter 1, Section 7, which is how to solve absolute value equations and inequalities. Now, first of all, an absolute value means that we're measuring the distance from 0. So that means that the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. Because negative 5 is 5 units away from 0 on a number line. So, when we have a problem like this, we're going to actually split every absolute value into two problems. So the first one is we're going to get the positive side, because if x minus 5 equals 7, what's the absolute value of 7? 7. But it can also be a negative value, because what's the absolute value of negative 7? It is also 7. So absolute values are weird because every time you solve a problem with an absolute value, you split it into two. And then we solve them at the same time. So here, how do we get x by itself? We add 5. And then we do the same thing here and get the following. And now we graph this just like we would graph an inequality, except that when it's an equal, there's no shading involved. So we need two values. We need negative 2 and we need our negative 12. Oop. And we need our 12. And we do want to make sure that they're spaced out. Now on your paper, make sure that you use a constant scale. So you're going to want to leave a roadmap for people. And I'm not particularly picky when it comes to making sure that you mark every dash mark, but you do need to leave enough so that way I know what your scale is. Okay, x equals 12. If you equal something, you're the filled in circle just like we did with the inequalities when it was an or equal to. And then x equals negative 2. So these are the solutions, and because there are no less than or greater than signs, there is no shading, and we're done. This is all they want you to do. So you've got to remember that the absolute value splits into two equations, and then you solve each equation simultaneously. And that's all they're asking you to do. So for this problem, same basic approach. To solve it, we have to split it. So what are your two splits? We get the positive side, because if 45 goes inside here, the statement's true. And then we also get the negative side, because if negative 45 goes into here, the statement is still true. To get x by itself, we're going to add 10 to both sides of the equal sign. And we're going to do this to both sides. Again, kind of like what we did when we split apart an inequality. The work is exactly the same. It's just that the numbers change. So you have to pay attention to your order of operations, but the steps are exactly the same between the left side and the right side. So finish these off real quick. And those are your two solutions. So this statement is true if x equals negative 7 or x equals 11, and you're done. So again, absolute value, you just split it apart into the two equations and then work your way through it. Well, what if we have an inequality? Same first step. Split it apart first and then solve. Now, where we have to be careful here is that negative sign. Okay, so the first split is easy. It's just like what we have. So your split, nothing changes. Okay? Now, for your next split, we would normally write 4x plus 5. If this were an equal sign, it would be 4x plus 5 equals 13. But how do you change a negative 13 to a positive 13? You multiply by a negative 1, right? Now, what do you know, though? Whenever we multiply or divide by a negative, what do we have to do with that inequality sign? Right, we flip it. So when it comes to an absolute value with an inequality, we write it first exactly how it looks, and then the second split we flip the inequality sign and change the sign on the right-hand piece. Okay, we have to do that to maintain equality. And what's weird is that actually happens with the equation, but an equal sign looks exactly the same regardless of which way you write it. So even though it's flipping, you just don't get to see it. With the inequality signs, you actually see it flip. So remember, your first split is identical to what's written. Your second split, flip the inequality sign, change the sign on the right-hand side, and then you solve it just like we solve everything. So we're going to subtract 5, work our way through this problem, and remember, because it's an inequality, as we work our way through it, we have to check and make sure that we're not multiplying or dividing by a negative, which we are not doing at any place. Okay? So solve the left-hand side, solve the right-hand side. And there you go. Okay, so same basic approach. Split it into its two pieces. Solve each piece using your general rules, and remember that the quirk with solving an inequality is if you multiply or divide by a negative. So if you notice, you might be saying, well, we're dividing and we have a negative here. Right, but are we dividing by a negative? No, we're dividing by a positive 4. So you have to make sure that you're paying really close attention. All right, being meticulous in this section is not going to hurt you. It's going to help you a lot. So you need to make sure you're paying very, very close attention to the signs, because that is the #1 mistake that students make. Okay, and now graph the inequality. So we're going to come back. We need to graph x less than -9/2 and x greater than 2. Again, 9/2 is going to be -4.5. We need to figure out where to place that, right? And we should know by now that it's between -5 and -4. And then we need to get up to 2. Then go 1 past. Okay, at -9/2. Open circle or closed circle? Open. Left or right shade? Left. Okay. X greater than 2, open or closed circle? Open. Where is x greater? To the right. So this is a lot like the last section. The only thing that's changed is when you see that absolute value, you have to split it into its two pieces first. From the original equation into these two equations with no absolute values, and then solve just like we did through the entire chapter. So again, this is what your graph will look like. And that's it. This section is not extremely heavy. The only thing that's new is when you see an absolute value, split it apart. So if you struggled in 1.7 or 1.3, which was the solving equations or solving inequalities, this is a chance to make sure that you get all of your stuff figured out, because this is also the last section of the chapter, which means that we have a chapter test coming up. These problems came out of the Algebra 2 Michigan edition distributed by McDougal Littell.